I'm Amanda Leitner, and welcome to Rochester Rising, where we amplify the stories of Rochester entrepreneurs. Welcome to episode 128 of the podcast today. So today we have our latest From the Edge podcast, where we invite two guests from the community to come on the show and have a general discussion about trends we're seeing in entrepreneurship. So this has been a really fun new series to record. I believe this is the fourth From the Edge podcast that we recorded. And this month we welcomed two very different early stage entrepreneurs in the community, one focused in biotechnology and one focused in software development. So two really interesting ends of the spectrum. So on the show today, we talk with Solomon Antoine. Solomon is the CEO and developer at FAVR Inc., which is a peer-to-peer platform that allows customers to request tasks at their own price. Also on the podcast today, we talk with Zach WareJoncas. He's the co-founder of LEAH Labs, which is a brand new biotech that's working to bring modern health to the veterinary space. And as always on the From the Edge podcast, we're joined by Jamie Sundsbak, community manager at Collider Coworking. So we cover a lot of ground on the podcast today, talking about very different issues, including mental health and entrepreneurs, the value of managing your health, a potential biotech bubble, and a discussion about Rochester as an attractive or unattractive place for entrepreneurs. So listen in, you're in for a real treat today. And we're always looking for guests to come on the From the Edge podcast, people really ingrained in the entrepreneurial ecosystem here in Rochester. So if you have a great suggestion for a guest for the From the Edge podcast, send us an email and let us know at rochesterrising@gmail.com. All right, so now on to the podcast with Solomon, Zach, and Jamie. So thanks everyone for being here today to I think it's the fourth From the Edge podcast at this point. I'm not even quite sure. We'll just roll with it.
Fourth from the edge.
Fourth from the edge. So thank you for being here, and I'll let you guys introduce yourselves.
Yeah, I'm Solomon Antoine. I'm the CEO and developer at FAVR Inc., a peer-to-peer platform that allows customers to request tasks at their own price. So yeah, that's Solomon.
Hi, I'm Zach. I do two things here in town. First off, I'm the co-founder and COO of a company called LEAH Labs, working to bring modern cancer therapy to the veterinary health space. And I also work for the Mayo Clinic Office of Entrepreneurship, doing event coordination as a part-time job.
And I'm Jamie Sundsbak, and I apologize for any vacuuming sounds you may hear. We are upgrading Collider Coworking at this moment, getting things kind of freshened up, and that may cause a little bit of construction noise during the podcast, but that's okay because we know that things are happening here in Rochester.
Yeah, it's always fun to have the background noise. I don't think we've done a single podcast without having something weird going on in the background, so that's normal. Okay, so the purpose of this today was to kind of just have a low-key discussion about entrepreneurship trends that we are seeing happening, whether it's in Rochester or kind of beyond the Rochester space. So we asked each of you to come today with something that you wanted to talk about. So who wants to start the conversation off today?
I guess I can.
All right.
Awesome.
One trend that I've noticed with entrepreneurship recently was the talking about mental health in my entrepreneurship. And before I got into working as an entrepreneur, I kind of underestimated what it kind of consists of and the toll that it takes on your mental mind and stuff like that. So one thing that I've noticed recently was I have a constant fear of, should I continue to keep going with this entrepreneurship, or should I just call it quits and get a 9-to-5 job and just be boring for the rest of my life? So yeah, I actually worked a 9-to-5 and I absolutely hated it. So it's kind of worth the trade-off. Like, do you want to live with the stress of are you sure you're going to bring in money, or do you want to live with the stress of, okay, I'm working for somebody else, should I continue to do this? I hate it, I dread it. And so it's a double-edged sword with entrepreneurship and the mental health side of things. And that's kind of what I have going on right there.
I think that's a fantastic topic and something we've been very actively working on with things with the Collider Foundation and many new plans that we're still trying to wrap our heads around. But no, I totally agree. And I think this is something that people have started to talk more about, like what you were hinting at in the startup space. And it's very hard. I think a lot of it is too, like, I think entrepreneurs are high achievers in a lot of sense, and we never want to show any weakness. So anytime you show weakness, it's like, it's really, you feel devastated, and it's just not healthy all around. And I don't know how we work around that, but that's something that I struggle with is, I think all of us probably to get to this point have been, well, I guess I shouldn't speak for everybody, but probably, I know for me, it's always been like perfectionism and high achievement. And when you don't reach that, you just, I don't know, you feel like you failed, even if it's impossible.
Right. Well, I mean, actually building on that, I was going to say a catalyst to that would be, with entrepreneurship, with entrepreneurs, you're always working. There's no breaks. And that's kind of what I noticed, a few months back was when I didn't really take any breaks. I wasn't going out to the gym. I didn't find a hobby. And so that was probably one of my lowest points when I was working as an entrepreneur. So as of recently, though, one thing that I've noticed that's kind of boosted my mental health was trying to find a hobby. So one thing that I've been doing recently was programming. It's not programming for my company, but it's programming for, another passion I have. It's like a physics calculator. I used to be a big physics guy. So that's one thing I've been doing. And then basketball, of course, that's very therapeutic for me. And so finding breaks within the entrepreneurship, I think, really helps that mental health side of things.
Yeah, I definitely share that problem. When I first decided to join the startup company, I had all these goals of I was going to continue my gym schedule and make it to the gym, the same number of days. And I think since starting the company, I've averaged 1 day a week, and I really need to change that because I think that's, it's people talk a lot about how the company is made out of the people, but they talk about maintaining the company and don't talk so much about maintaining the people. But I think you're all right that it has become an increasing trend to talk about that more in addition to managing your business, how to manage your own health, and then make sure you look out for your employees and your co-founders as well. Because that's, if you don't keep healthy and keep in a good mental spot, the company won't work either.
Yeah, that's 100% true, and that's what I think we've all come to that realization. Some faster than others, but that's one thing that we're trying to wrap our minds around with the Collider Foundation, our new nonprofit, is how do we look after the whole entrepreneur? I think a lot of that help and support started with, how can we help a company? How can we connect someone to a lawyer to get their LLC filed or something like that? And there's a lot of stress with that, beginning company formation, barriers you might have as you grow your company. But the one that isn't talked about is mental health, and that's the one that I've found that as I've created sort of these one-on-one connections with people in the community, it creates that sort of trust, and people open up, and they open up about a lot of those issues. And those issues, I think, are faced by any entrepreneur. We're starting to see some stats showing that the rate of bipolar disorder, entrepreneurs are 10 times more likely to be bipolar, double the rate for suicide, double the rate for depression. So it's a big thing. It's starting to get some national and international attention. I know the Kauffman Foundation in Kansas City is very interested in it. There's several studies going on around it, and I think that you're going to hear more and more about that in the next few years, especially with entrepreneurship participation at an all-time low, really, in the country. Maybe that could be potentially some of the reasons of it. It's hard, and without the right support and the right really mentorship around, and relationships to help you through it, I think it's not good for you. And I wouldn't recommend anyone ever try to do the whole entrepreneurship thing alone in a vacuum. I think it's impossible. And definitely if any people are out there listening to this podcast that kind of have those same feelings, and you're in the area, I'm always around to chat with. And I'd love to help in any way I can.
Yeah, I would say too, back to your point, Solomon, is that you absolutely, and you, Zach, as well, you absolutely have to find those breaks to take care of your well-being, whether it's meditation. And I think we talked about that a while ago, and until you do it, like meditation seems silly to me, but I didn't really know anything about it, and that there's just different kinds and like what you're trying to get out of it. But yeah, even like when I first started like being a full-time entrepreneur, I was really into running previously, and then I completely lost it. Like I just didn't have any time. I had no time, and it felt like horrible. It took me like 2 years to get back to it, and I actually think I'm just starting to get back now. But it's finding that balance too of what's healthy in terms of running, like too much. Like I would run marathons and like a couple of them a year, and it was like insane. And now I've decided that's not quite healthy either. So where do we go in between there? But also part of it too is that, sometimes we just have to say no to stuff for our own mental health. Like, and that's what I'm starting to do. Like, yes, there is quote unquote always time, but there's not. Like, you have to have protected time, and that's what I've been trying to do, is have protected time. If I know I literally cannot carve out an hour to do this a day within, the 12 hours that I dedicate to working a day, then I got to say no to it, and I've gotten to the point where it's kind of okay if you're upset with me because I said no, because I can't do it.
Yeah, that's, it's funny how we always can schedule a meeting, but we just can't schedule time to play basketball with our friends, or time to go biking, or you just time to not, in my case as an only child, not deal with people for a couple of hours. So I can sort of reset, and that's just what helps me. But it's just amazing that we'll never throw that on our calendars, because when something, a fire you have to fight comes up in your company, suddenly that's the first thing out the window. And really that should be the most protected time of all. Family time, things like that. That's the stuff that's going to keep you going. And I always find it hilarious that we always seem to throw that off first, or not even block it on our schedules, when that actually is probably the most important thing that we can do to sort of keep our compass pointing to the north and sailing north. And wow, that was deep. We'll just stop there.
I think along those lines, I was at a Christine Beach and Heather Holmes have been doing these like women entrepreneur forums in the community, and I believe it was Kathleen Harris, the head of the chamber, who said basically, like, especially for women, like cutting time out for your families is such a hard thing to do, and it's often looked down upon. But like at the end of it, all of our companies, all these things that we're working on, we're going to work through them and eventually work past them or work us out of a job, right? Which is kind of the goal. And who's left for you at the end? Your family is who's at the end of it. So that really should be the number one priority. And I would argue it's hard. It's probably not, unfortunately, it's not most of our number one priorities, even though we'd like to say it is.
I'm really depressed.
But I think to end on a happier note, though, is, we, like you were saying, Solomon, you just got to find that thing that you have a passion to do that's outside of, like, you have to find something, a hobby that's not work, and just do it.
I think we have a kind of what you're saying earlier, Amanda, that we have a set idea of what meditation looks like and what it's supposed to be. You're supposed to sit still and be very quiet. And I have a good family friend who it's a pretty stressful job, and he swears by the form of meditation that is walking through his yard and picking up the sticks, and that's what he does to unwind. And so I think we have to be more open to anything that makes you feel that you're able to kind of relax and have some time to yourself can count as your personal form of meditation and self-care.
I think you have to be really mindful about kind of taking your temperature throughout the day. And I'm not talking about physical temperature, but mental temperature, where, things can go disastrously wrong. And you have a couple of choices at that moment. You can do what I used to do, which was throw a fit and get really angry and storm around. Or you can find something creative to put that energy into. I've seen people in a previous life, a previous job I worked, when my boss would get upset, you could tell, because he would jump on his bike and go out on the bike trail for an hour and come back and realize probably it wasn't as crazy as he thought. So trying to sort of continuously take your temperature of how things are going, and when something is just really upsetting, trying to, kick something in that's going to help you sort of maybe not necessarily forget about it, but just calm down a bit, I think is also very useful, and it kind of keeps you going through the ups and downs of entrepreneurship.
I think it is coming to the surface more, though. Like, I was actually just listening to a podcast. I think it was Skims from the Couch, if you're familiar with that. And they had Chelsea Handler on there. And we all know what Chelsea Handler's like. I mean, she's a pretty electric personality. And she said, she's been meditating 20 minutes a day now every morning. And I think it goes back to that looks different for everybody. But she said it's really helped her, like, things you would previously, like, really react to. It's not a big deal. You have that time where you've actually, like, got into a more relaxed state at the beginning of your day, and it just helped her to realize things weren't that big of a deal. And I think I've been trying to do the same thing, thinking about, okay, take 5 minutes to actually calm down. Are you going to be this worked up about it tomorrow? Probably not. So then let's actually try and come up with a solution instead of getting upset and or blaming somebody else, And sometimes those things are appropriate, but they're not constructive. So that's at least my way to try and deal with some stuff.
Still depressed.
Well, it's a sunny day out.
We need something happy. Let's be happy.
Zach,
Solomon's
take us
shaking
forward.
the water jug. That's always good.
I was just thinking about the other half of what you had said, Solomon, about thinking about should I go back to a 9-to-5 job? And that's, I think, something that plays in the back of everybody's mind when you're starting a company is, well, either should I go back or, well, if this doesn't work, what will I do next? And that's natural to think about that kind of stuff. And it's important to be able to find time to process those thoughts too, in addition to the fires you're putting out and the making time for yourself. It's like, it's rational as I think just a human being to think about what your other, your contingency plans would be. And I think it is that question that a lot of us face. We're entrepreneurs because, we find 9-to-5s boring, and because we think we have a good idea that could help people. And it is important to be able to find time to process all of that, as well as these other, that's another part of self-care that I think is really important, is not judging yourself for those thoughts, allowing them to happen, and figuring out why you're thinking them, I think, too. I don't know.
Yeah, I think what sucks about that, though, is I'll probably be in, like, the cheeriest moods, right? I'll be happy with what I'm doing right now, and then all of a sudden that thought comes to my mind. Mm-hmm. That is a real deal breaker right there. That can really mess with you throughout the day, where you're like, oh, I'm in a cheery mood, and then all of a sudden you think about, oh, snap, what's my future look like? What am I going to do? So, I just kind of wanted to add that in there just since you brought that up.
Yeah.
So the differentiator is I'm really old and you're really young. So sometimes that, I remember when I was in college and I was trying to think of where I was going in my future. It was like, it's interesting now that, I'm a little bit older, that it's a different thing. I know no matter what, because I think I have a lot of confidence in myself, that if a venture doesn't work, I'll find something. Mm-hmm. I'll be okay. And that's something that's really kept me going through this journey through Collider is, I know I'll be fine. There'll be something that crops up. Everything will be fine. Will it be an ideal job? No, but look at the entire population of the United States. When you ask them, do you love what you do? Most people say no. And so at least for a time, you can always fall back on something and just, while you're in that, even though it may not be the ideal thing, you learn a ton. And start thinking about that next thing and how you're going to get there. And you have lots of opportunity to do that. You have lots of opportunity to do that too. I'm pretty much, going to be dead in 3 weeks. So that's
you out the pasture.
Yeah, I'm going to retire now with my my no savings. So wow, we are depressing today, aren't we?
No, but I would say too. I mean, that's something that
podcast.
Yeah.
over the hill podcast.
Yeah, I think that's definitely something you have to keep in mind, though, too, is that, you have all these skill sets that you've built up, and, that can apply to so many things. And that's, I think, if you have the opportunity to do something for even a little bit in your life that you're super passionate about, then I think you've come out the other end because, a lot of people won't do that. And they won't take that risk to try and do it.
And the skills you learn as an entrepreneur, that quick thinking, that decision making, just moving forward with stuff, I mean, that is so valuable inside of many companies. It just depends on the company culture, but a lot of companies really, they don't see a lot of employees like that. So being able to temper it correctly once you get the read of what the company is and how they like to do things is kind of the first step. But a lot of times people are really impressed by, people who have taken that entrepreneurial journey and companies can benefit from that.
Well, what I kind of learned was companies or when I was applying to a few jobs, when they found out my ventures, they kind of shoot away from that just because they were looking for more of the boring people. When they think of entrepreneur, they kind of think of a bad employee. That's kind of the vibe that I kind of got.
So maybe it's not a good fit for you. I would say that company's not a good fit for you then, So because I would want somebody like you working for me personally.
Is that a job offer?
I have no job to offer. I tried. But I think that's part of it too, is that, I've actually felt more uncomfortable working for like businesses or large organizations than outside of them, because I feel like it's not so much a control thing, but it kind of is too, because you can see kind of where it's your vision that you're kind of following, with advice and mentorship and stuff. But I actually feel like I have more direction outside of a large organization or business, like when you're pushing your own initiative, than inside. I've always felt more comfortable outside than in, if that makes any sense. And I think it's just like figuring that out, and it doesn't mean you make the right choice the first time or the second or third. It's just something you have to work through.
And there's sort of what I call a halfway option, which can be find another startup to work for. So you're not the founder. You're not dealing with all these crazy decisions that you got to make 30 times a day. Mm-hmm. You're probably still working 12 hours or more, but at least kind of very narrow focus of what you need to focus on, what your role is in that company, maybe being employee number 5 or 6 or something like that. And that's a good way to learn, especially from experienced startup founders. And then, you can come to a path and say, hey, if it's for you, maybe you learned a ton from this startup. Hopefully, something good happened and you made some money along the way. Mm-hmm. And then jumping into your own venture with a little bit of advice from and learning by doing in a startup, or maybe you just choose to jump into the corporate world after that, or another small business. But that's what I always tell people when they think it's either I'm going to be a founder of a company or I'm going to work for a giant company. And it's like there's a lot of other options there. Mm-hmm. So I always say that trying to find another startup and jumping in, that's actually a good way to learn as well.
That's a good point. Well, you're probably employee number 2 or 3 of your startup.
So I jumped onto my startup still very early on. I think it had been incorporated for 2 months when I joined on full time. I've been working a little bit part time before then. So I'm employee number 2. Okay. So I joined on more as a co-founder than as an employee, but it does still sometimes feel like that because it wasn't my idea that was the startup. But so I feel like I have an interesting mix of feeling like a co-founder and feeling like a first employee. So it is still, a lot of the day-to-day is what I'm handling. A lot of the decisions is what I'm handling. So I don't think I have a good grasp of what it's like at a small startup joining on as a, employee 5 or 6. But I think that is another good option to consider as an in-between to doing your own company and joining a big, huge company. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. All right, shall we move on to the next topic? Do you have something a little bit more uplifting for us?
So I have something a little bit, it's definitely in a different zone.
Okay.
Good. I think we need to shift gears for sure.
We need to shift gears. So there's 2 things I could talk about. We can start with one if we want to move on to another, we can. The first thing I was thinking about is more specific to what I'm doing as a biotech company. Is I think that we're approaching this point where biotech industries are starting to be at the same point that like the .com boom and like tech industries were 30 years ago, where a lot of people, like it's clearly happening, technology development at a rapid pace, making a lot of new things possible. But we're also getting a lot of these people that facing a lot of the same challenges, where a lot of people are saying, oh, the internet won't amount to anything. Like, oh, that's not a big enough idea. That's not exciting. And then here we are, those 20, 30 years later, and the internet controls huge aspects of day-to-day life. And so as bringing this back to more of a general trend in entrepreneurialism is just figuring out, as my company's in fundraising mode right now, how to react when investors say no and they don't think your idea is interesting, when clearly you're starting to come because you think your idea is interesting and has this potential to be huge in this huge market. And I find that I have these 2 primary reactions to getting a no from an investor or hearing that my co-founder got a no from an investor, which is one, is to get sad and, like, we're never going to get the money we need. And the other one is, I can't wait until I can rub it in their faces when we succeed. I don't think that either of those are entirely productive as individual ideas. And I'm trying to figure out what that other, either blended option of that is like, more calm. I'll prove them wrong as opposed to I can't grumbling to myself as I return to the grind. And so I'm trying to figure out what the best way to respond to, what I view personally as people not quite seeing the same idea that I see or not seeing the same value of the idea that I see, which I think is common to a lot of fundraising. And it feels that I'm sure a lot of founders go through it. And so I thought that was an interesting thing to maybe discuss.
You should read the Venture Deals book by Brad Feld and Jason
Mendelson.
That's what we're both kind of, I guess, auditing this class, which is basically just 6-year-old videos of Brad Feld in an abandoned room with a lot of fake plants talking about venture deals.
They're tech stars, not set design stars.
Yeah. I don't know. It's just really interesting, though. I don't know that I definitely don't have much insight into that, but it's interesting to read the book to understand what goes into the thought process. This is from venture capital, and I'm not sure if you're talking to venture capital or angels.
Bit of both. Yeah.
It was just interesting to read that book because I didn't know a lot of the terminology, and you probably know a lot more than me about that at this point, but it was just some interesting perspectives. And then, them saying you always hear the no is not a no, it's a not now, or it's a keep asking, and that is not what he is saying. He is saying if it's a no, it's a no. Like, do not come back. It's not a I'm waiting to see if you're persistent type of thing.
Right. It's figuring out how true the statement is that a business relationship is a series of organized nagging of different people. And I found that some aspects of it are true. Sometimes you need to talk to your law firm a few times, like, hey, you haven't sent me this document, or you haven't sent me this invoice, or whatever it is they need to send you. But there's a point where it's not nagging anymore. It's just they're not going to do what you've asked. And so that's another balance to strike with, especially fundraising. But I think a lot of different aspects of business is that right balance of, being, like you said, persistent versus saying, okay, I need to move on to the next thing and stop sinking time into this that isn't producing results.
And kind of getting back to what you were saying about, what I'm starting to call the potential biotech explosion. The first VC firms that were dealing with tech, they weren't funding things either. Mm-hmm. It was only after things sort of started to get established. There's a couple of big players that start to move fast. Then there's a lot of deal flow that happens after that. I'll go out on a limb here because why not? I think there's a great opportunity for venture capital around biotech to not be centered in Silicon Valley. Mm-hmm. Because quite honestly, I think, at least from what I've heard from people, the people in Silicon Valley just have this overwhelming tech mindset for everything. And it's I think a great opportunity for somewhere else, whether it's Boston or somewhere else, to put experts who actually understand the science. One of the things I was told very early on when I was pitching my tech/life science company in the early 2000s is don't talk science at all. Just tell them on a high level what it can do, and then immediately ask, and then tell them that your market or the revenue you're going to put in is up and to the right constantly for the next 20 years, and it's going to double or triple or quadruple every quarter. And that's what they wanted to hear. You could have been super honest with them and said, well, I don't know, we're kind of at this stage. They didn't care. They're just like, tell me how this is going to make me money now. And I think and we've talked about this on other, I think mm-hmm. with Nathan, mm-hmm. This rise of what I keep calling patient capital. It's realizing that science can't move like tech. I mean, someone could be, hanging over a weekend, getting an app coded or something like that. You can only do so many experiments because, things have to incubate, and you can't speed that up. If you do, there's going to be a problem. and you have to replicate your experiments and things like that. That stuff takes time. And I think that not only does it take time, but when you're dealing with humans, and you're dealing with animals, but when you're dealing with humans or animals, there's a lot of that regulatory component and things like that. So you can't expect to be making money like eBay did, which was essentially coding eBay over a weekend, and suddenly they were in San Francisco doing stuff. That just doesn't happen with biotech. And I think there's to be a different investor mindset and a different time horizon to where it makes sense. And I don't exactly know what that will look like, but I think the capital has to evolve if biotech is going to be funded the way it should be in the future.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. It's just true. And going kind of a synthesis of both of the talks we were talking about is the problem I have with biotech and not being able to speed up the experiments is often I feel like I'm sitting there like I've done a bunch of stuff in the morning and I get to the afternoon and I can't really do any more of the hardcore science of developing our product. Mm-hmm. Like, well, I can pay bills and make sure that I keep the lights on and that we have supplies, and then trying to make sure that like a big, another mental challenge of making sure I don't feel like I'm just being useless and a drain on the company. I can't do science any faster than it's already going, and that's what I'm here to do. And that's another just make me think of that when you were talking about the different speed of biotech as we hear all these stories about, like you said, people coding over the weekend or people, the whole team that did Airbnb was sitting in one apartment until they got their funding. And you can do that. In biotech, you need the lab, you need the space, you need the staff, and you need the reagents, and you need and so it's just a different thing where I feel like we're adapting to a different story that hasn't been told a lot before because there haven't been a lot of huge biotech startups yet.
I don't know. I think it is true what you said, Jamie, about, this investment mindset. It's probably going to happen in very specific regions that are already very dedicated to healthcare because you've already kind of understand the process. Because it takes, how long does it take a product to get to market? For a human, it's probably like at least 10 years to get a return on investment. An animal might be a little bit shorter because of less regulatory burden. But it's just understanding that, and it's not going to move any faster because not only do you have to replicate things, you have to have someone who can actually interpret the results, and that's not just anybody. It's a very specific person. So it's just a whole different beast, I think.
Yeah, I think that is something we noticed, and one of the things that my company does went through this business accelerator out in San Francisco called Y Combinator, which is traditionally a very internet tech startups. That's where Airbnb went through there, Cruise went through there, credit card company Brex went through Y Combinator, and they're trying to scrunch the biotech language or the biotech environment into the language and the round peg square hole thing. They've got this very neatly defined box of what a tech startup and like an early stage startup is supposed to do, and they're trying to take the round peg that is biotechnology and all these different things and use that language and that mindset to describe it. And they, instead of thinking that that's what we need to do, we need to figure out how to frame this in a tech startup. I think you're right that there's this opportunity for biotech to develop in its own space, both in this way how you talk about it and where it is. Because I think, you think of part of the reason that the tech startups are traditionally out in San Francisco is because you think of where, where Silicon Valley is, where the money is, where the other big players, Google, Microsoft, all those people were based. When you think about biotech, you don't think about California. You think about places like, the University of Minnesota and Boston and these other big hubs of where are the big universities that are doing bio research. And so I think that you're right, Jamie, that there is a huge opportunity to develop the place where biotech happens somewhere else, not in Silicon Valley.
Well, I think you two represent very different ends of the spectrum here because how long did it take FAVR to get to market? Or for you to develop it and get it out there?
To develop the first version, I remember Jamie was telling me, "Hey, man, you got to build this product yourself." And that was a month, the first version. Yeah.
To get
and
your
that
beta.
Was with me not even knowing how to code. So with the more recent one, with the actual app, we built the app in a few weeks, but then we had to start testing that.
Yeah.
But otherwise, it's pretty quick when it comes to building the actual app. If it's not, it's not in the biotech field. So yeah. It's a whole different beast. Not a beast, but
Oh, it is. I mean, it comes with its own its own issues and
But I would
hoops.
say I would think it's a little bit easier than the biotech.
Oh, I don't know. I think it's just different. It's just a totally different thing.
It's different, and it's just very, very, very time dependent. I mean, you just, like I said, you can't speed up experiments. By the way, your website is awesome.
What's up?
Your new. I don't know how new it is, but the FAVR website. I was looking at the other because you're doing 1 million cups in a week, which is a good plug.
Yeah.
So I was checking it out, and I'm just like, wow, I really, really like it, and I was really excited to see how nicely done it was. I had a point there. I don't know what it was, but definitely, just that speed thing is so different. And the one thing I can say about maybe a hope for how sort of this tech revolution can sort of affect biotech is right now you're probably seeing the third or fourth greatest minting of millionaires and billionaires in Silicon Valley with, the IPO of Lyft and Uber and Airbnb and Pinterest and all these sort of companies that have been kind of waiting on the sidelines to IPO. More and more what I read, and again, it's kind of detached because I'm not walking around in the valley every day, is a lot of these people are very, very obsessed with life extension and curing disease and aging, life extension.
Yeah. So,
is there a way to find these newly minted people that do care about that and say, hey, we're doing this particular biotech, which is going to, lengthen telomeres. Wow, there was science. Where did I get that from? My God, it's been so many years. But things like that, to where they're like, okay, I'll take a bet on that, and I have time. I don't know if there's a way to harness that, because obviously these are tech people. They're probably not skilled in science, but could they be sort of corralled under one group, and a venture group or an angel group, and be led by a couple of people that know the science and know the industry, and really put that money to work for, solving these huge, what I call the big hairy problems, which is education, healthcare, things like that. We really have not solved because they're hard, and it's easier to back companies, that can be created fast, can be tested, iterated fast, and all of a sudden, in 5 years, it's a nice 10x return for someone, and I'd put my money into that. Even though when I know biotech's the ultimately probably bigger game changer, but it's just not as safe of a bet. So I get it. I just wonder if there's a way to convince people, to sort of pool their resources and say, okay, you've done like literally pictures of people or things on a wall that people find interesting, which to me is the definition of Pinterest. Now, let's go save lives. I don't know if there's a way to do that, but that would be an interesting way to play it and get these people to put their money to work for these more, I wouldn't say more noble purposes, but maybe, like I said, these longer, saving lives for the next 100 or 200 years, or extending my life, which, we were just talking about my retirement.
3 weeks.
3 weeks to 90 years, that'd be great.
Oh, that was great. You guys, on that note, do you want to wrap up with your topic, your trend?
I would actually, the whole depression thing, that was mine. So
that's what you brought.
Yeah, that was the one I brought
that
I wanted to talk about. Let's see quickly if there's something else. I guess a good question that I've always wanted to ask is, and it's good to have newer people in the room who maybe are newer to sort of the entrepreneurial ecosystem, is how do you think Rochester's moving ahead? Is it a place you want to be an entrepreneur, or is it still needing a lot of work? And if suddenly, I don't know, Cedar Rapids said, hey, we're going to do this awesome thing for entrepreneurs, move here, would you move there? Just wondering, kind of taking the temperature of how we're doing in Rochester and what we need to continue to improve on.
Yeah, my perspective on it would be, if I'm not really in the biotech field like you are, I wouldn't really want to come to Rochester. I've lived in Burnsville or the metro area for the past 7-8 months, and I realized like the networks and the resources up there are far greater than down here. I remember when I was working on FAVR, and I was just trying to find like who are the I was trying to create a list of the investors that I would know that would be willing to invest in it. And I was like, whoa, I can't find anybody more than 3 or 4 people. But then I go up there and I have a list of 50 to 100 people, and it's just, yeah. So I would say overall, I wouldn't want to come to Rochester with FAVR, but it's, home to me because, the community kind of jump-started it for me. But yeah, otherwise, if I was a brand new entrepreneur, nah.
I think that Rochester has a couple of things going for it in that build a huge amount of potential that has yet to be activated. In this town, there are a lot of talented people. There's a lot of, especially like you said, if I'm doing a biotech company, I need to recruit some people with experience, especially in the healthcare field. Yeah, Rochester with the Mayo Clinic is going to be one of the places you're going to look to try to find, hey, who's somebody who actually has experience applying what I want to do in the clinic? There is, I think, another advantage that Rochester has is just things tend to be cheaper here than in most other cities with the amenities you have in Rochester. I will say that Rochester still, lags behind the Twin Cities in terms of some of the amenities you can get, like you were talking about, easy connections, not as many big corporate law firms or investors or, places to tempt your employees, say, hey, look at all these cool places you could eat if you moved here.
Right.
But we're getting better. But I think you're right that Rochester is still nascent in developing an entrepreneurial community, both in access to resources and in the general mindset of the population here. Whereas you can find, a few people, and obviously we have a community here and it's growing, and we're working hard to grow that entrepreneurial community. But the vast majority of people you could talk to in the hallway, you're like, they're incredibly talented. They have this great idea. You're like, hey, do you want to leave your day job to start a company? And they all say, no, why would I do that?
Right.
And then you have these building full of thousands of researchers with great ideas, and half the ideas are sitting in drawers or closets, and nobody's, trying to get them started. I think that can be changed, and I think there's a lot of progress being made with the efforts of groups like the Collider Foundation, 1 Million Cups, and all that, to try to bring people together and realize, oh, hey, my, that back burner thought of, I could start a company. Other people have that idea. Oh, hey, there's a guy I just talked to at this event that I went to the other day, and he's, I've been thinking about starting a company. I have all this business experience, but I just haven't found, the right idea to start the company. And then you might be able to connect them with the person who's like, I have this idea, but I don't think I could run a company. Get those two people in the same room, find them a third person who has a little bit of money in their back pocket, looking to extend their life or
their dog's life.
Their dog's life, yes.
Anything like that, and you're off to the races. And I think you could do that in Rochester if you can provide more of a framework and not even convince people to come up with good ideas, because the ideas are there. Convince people that it's not weird to leave your 9-to-5 job to pursue a new idea, because it's definitely possible. And then you go to your investors and say, hey, not only is my idea great, not only do I have a great team, look at how cheap it is to live in this town.
Yeah.
No, I totally agree. It's a lot of cultural change. And like you were saying, that fear of, if this doesn't work, what do I do next? But I mean, like you were saying, Zach, we have such a low cost of living. Like the unemployment rate's so low, everyone's hiring. It's like, you can work at Fresh Time for a couple months, get some good veggies, and then work on your next thing, So
Is Fresh Time a sponsor of the podcast?
They should be.
Okay. Just wondering.
Hey, Fresh Time.
I thought that was a great segue.
My father-in-law does work for Fresh Time.
Nice.
There you go.
But I get it. It's culture. And even like when I've had so many conversations with people, and Jamie has, and I'm sure both of you have too, where they'll say, hey, I just left my job, and we're like, congratulations. And they say, you're the first person who told me that today. Everyone else was telling me, what are you thinking? And that's a huge problem.
Right. No, and just briefly on the cost of living, made me think I have a friend from high school who's working for a startup out in Boston, and for his 1-bedroom apartment, he's paying $3,500 because he doesn't have a car and he needs to live close to work. Why would you? It's infinitely more not infinitely, but the amount of capital efficiency you save by having your employees' rent be 30% or less what you would pay in Boston or San Francisco is, I think that's on its own is a game changer. Like it has the potential to be, if we can, just show investors, hey, you want a capital efficient company? Look at Rochester.
All right, that sounds like a good ending point. Unless someone has some final thoughts.
I should probably go check my parking real quick. Check. Oh, it expired. So.
We're doing
Oh,
we're
boy.
doing the parking meter podcast next.
Yes. Sponsored by.
If only there was an app. Oh wait, there is.
All right, well, we'll wrap up by thanking all of you for being here today. I appreciate it. I think this was a very good discussion. I think it's interesting that multiple things, the same things, come up over and over again. So I think that's saying something for sure. So again, thanks for being here today. I appreciate it. Thanks so much to Solomon, Zach, and Jamie for being on the From the Edge podcast today and having a discussion about trends they're seeing in entrepreneurship, both inside and outside of Rochester. All right, that's a wrap for the podcast today. Be sure to subscribe to our podcast on iTunes so that you never miss any stories of entrepreneurship and innovation coming out of Rochester, Minnesota. And we will see you here next week with a brand new episode.